Hello again, welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to carry on from where we left off last time, talking about targets and practicing. So without further ado, let's jump in and roll those titles. We're in shed and we're going to talk about paper targets. Paper targets then, probably three main sizes. Got 14 centimetre, 17 centimetre and A4. And you can get the old catchers for the different sizes. You see I've got an old t-shirt rolled up inside there that I use in either one, whichever I'm using, to muffle the sound a little bit so I don't annoy the neighbours with the sound of the pellets hitting the steel. So paper targets then, I tend to use a lot of A4 sheets because I print out my own targets, which is convenient, and there are plenty of websites online where you can download images to print out on A4 of all sorts of targets, anything you like really. The big drawback that I find with paper targets, particularly if I'm doing pellet testing or group testing, is that sometimes when the pellets go through the paper, because the paper's so thin, it rips the paper. So when you look through the scope, it doesn't give you a true representation of where the pellet actually is. And at times you might think that you've had a flyer, when you go up to the end of the range after the session and look at the bit of paper, you'll see that it's actually the paper's torn and the pellet was actually in the group and not where you think it was, so they can be a little bit misleading. So what I tend to do now to try and prevent that from happening a bit is use a cardboard backing. So bit of cardboard cut to A4 and then stick the paper on it with a clip or something. Now, nice thing about that is cardboard, I've got piles of these. Keep a nice pile of A4 cardboard sheets all ready to use. All you need, make yourself a template out of a bit of scrap ply, this is just 1/8 ply, and a box cutter. Keep it in the shed. Whenever I get a cardboard box that's big enough to fit the template on, instead of going out in the recycling, stick that on, cut round it, I've got another target. Now I mentioned about the paper ripping, what I tend to do as well is rather than stick a bit of paper on the card, I just shoot on the card itself. What we got, let's have a look. So you can see here, for example, bit of cardboard there. I haven't bothered putting the paper on, just doing some pellet tests, just made some dots with a felt pen, Sharpie or a dry board marker or something to shoot at. One thing that I would say that I find from experience, that if you do this, you know, I try and make these a sort of a pellet size, at least a pellet size. If you make them too small, they will disappear behind your reticle unless you've got a really fine reticle, and you have to keep moving to make sure that you're actually lined up. So I would suggest that you make them the marks bigger rather than smaller that you're aiming at, and also try and aim off as well, because if you're trying to practice groups and get a good group in and you decimate your aim point, you've got to make sure, if you want an accurate group, that you're aiming at the same point every time. So if your first couple of shots decimate the thing you're aiming at, then your grouping goes to pot. So you want to make sure that your pellet's going to hit away from the point that you're aiming at. Now, if you don't want to draw dots on your card, there are other bits and pieces that you can buy, all things that I've tried. You've got these 1-inch targets that you can stick on. Also, go in your stationers or in a pound shop and get or a craft shop sell them as well, and get a packet of coloured sticky dots, and you can stick the dots on. The only thing that I find with these is that sometimes when the pellets hit them, they get pulled into the cardboard, so you know, it deforms the actual dot, makes it difficult to aim at for future shots. But you know, it's always a chance. See these a lot online on different channels, the splatter burst targets. I don't like these for practicing for accuracy. It might be good to show somebody else who's watching you shooting, but the splatter burst tends to give you a false representation of your grouping. So where it goes yellow, the grouping always ends up looking bigger through the scope than it actually is, and you're not getting a true picture of what you're achieving when you're shooting. So I've got some, but I don't use them very often. So cardboard, as well as using cardboard for the A4, I've also started using cardboard for the other targets as well, because I find that a lot of the targets that you buy of the right size, like this one, they're just too flimsy, and the first couple of shots, because the holders only hold them at the edges, the first couple of shots they tend to bow in or they'll drop out, whereas a bit of card is a lot more substantial and it stays put. So and it's all going to be stuff that's just going to end up in your recycling bin, so you might as well use it again for a second time before you recycle it. Another thing you can do if you want to make your own targets but you haven't got a printer or don't want to print them out, is you can get these little template things with the different size holes in. You can just put them on your paper and you can draw circles, and you can have whatever sizes you want. I think this one goes up to 25mm, you've got 20, 15, I can go down 10, 8, so I can pick whatever size target I want. And shooting at circular representations of your kill zones, certainly for HFT, is very helpful, because if you're shooting where your pellet is affected by the wind, you're going to get a better idea of what the wind drift is, so you can learn where your aim off points are. Now, you used to be able to get hold of these. These are for a company called Air Targets. They don't sell them anymore, unfortunately, but they did this pack of HFT practice targets that have all the HFT kill zones. But it's probably, you know, it's pretty simple to create something like that yourself, either with your printer or, you know, with your template, to create that yourself, so that you're actually shooting at proper kill zone sizes. And as I say, you can get a better idea of the wind drift. If you do buy these traditional card targets, or you've bought any in the past and you've found that you don't think that they're really, you know, that you can't use them anymore, don't forget, you can turn them over and you can put what you like on the back. You can even pass these through your inkjet or your laser printer and print whatever you want on the back, and then you've got your own card target. So don't just leave them lying about not being used. I think the most important thing with your targets really is not to get set in your ways and do the same thing all the time. You need to change it up, because practicing can get very boring if you're doing the same thing time and time again, and if you get bored you stop doing it. So the more interesting you make it, the more you're going to want to keep doing it. So chop and change your targets around, shoot at different things. And don't forget, the important thing is to have fun. No reason why you can't shoot some tin cans now and again and knock them around. Also, bag of toy soldiers from the pound shop, and stick these up on in front of your backstop. Try and shoot their heads off at 25 yards. Always good, a good challenge. And something else that you've probably seen that I've just bought that I need to have a go at, that I've got to shoot with the grandkids just for some fun, is the little chalk men. So we're going to have a go with those and see what they're like. But as I say, it's important that you enjoy your practicing and you have a bit of fun. Otherwise you won't stick with it. Remember, practice, practice, practice. Now, for practicing your standers and your kneelers, of course you can use any target that's got the right kill size. But I tend to favour particularly for unsupported standers and kneelers, I tend to favour this particular target. So one where you hit the target and it flaps. Oh, you can flap it. They flap up, and then when you want to reset, you just hit the top one, and they all swing down. Now, why do I choose this target? Well, simply because you've got 5 shots, 5 executions. So I find that if you can complete the whole target, all 5 shots standing, and then switch, complete all the shots kneeling, and then go round again, that is a pretty good practice session for unsupported standers and kneelers, and you don't get too tired, because that's one of the things when you practice, you want, particularly for the positionals. If you spend too long practicing in one position, it can get a bit tiring. When you get tired, you make mistakes, you don't shoot so well, and you start to get demoralised. So let's talk about that. When you're out shooting, I find it's always good to be on the optimistic side of things rather than the pessimistic side. If you turn up at a peg, particularly for, say, an unsupported stander, and you've already got it in your mind that you've not much chance of knocking it over, then probably that's what you're going to achieve. You're not going to knock it over. Whereas if you've been practicing so that in your mind you feel like that there's a very good chance that you're going to knock it over, you're going to have this positive mental attitude that's going to make all the difference in your performance. So how do we achieve that? Well, in your practice you can achieve that by using a slightly bigger target, so there's more chance of you hitting it during your practice. And the target I just showed you, those paddles are 40mm diameter, whereas the targets that you're likely to be shooting, well, the targets you're likely to be shooting are going to be 35mm, so it's slightly bigger. So in practice you've got a better chance of hitting it. Also, you've got to think about the range as well. When you set yourself up for practice, don't make it hard on yourself. Obviously you want a challenge, but you don't want it to be stupidly easy, but you don't want to make it stupidly difficult either, so that you're not achieving your fixed aim. So perhaps start shooting at 15 yards out to 20 yards, gradually move back to the distance till you're getting to sort of full distance at 35 yards, so that you're building up this positive mental attitude and this optimistic approach to those types of shots. Finding somewhere to practice your supported kneelers and standers, that can be an issue. Now, unfortunately, I've got this tree at the end of the garden, and you probably would have seen me using this tree to demonstrate those positions in the last video. But all is not what it seems. Let me show you. If I want to practice using this tree and have a safe backstop, I've got to shoot towards the back of the garage, which in distance, so I can zoom in, only gives me about 18 yards, which is not a great deal of distance. So if I set up a 35mm target, you can see there at 18 yards, and then look through the scope, it's not going to give me a true representation of what I see on a course. Although it's a good start to get used to practicing, eventually I'm going to want a bit more of a challenge, so I'm going to want the target to look the same as it would do on a course at 35 yards. So how do I account for that then? Well, what I can do is just use a smaller kill size. I've done the calculations, and at 18 yards, a 20mm kill, as in this little flop over target that's next to the 35, 20mm kill zone will look exactly the same size for a scope at 18 yards that a 35mm will look at 35 yards. So I can practice with the same degree of difficulty in a limited space. And if I haven't got a suitable tree or post, I could always use some shooting sticks, rest on the shooting sticks, or even the tripod that I've been using to film. You can use that Oh, let's tighten it up, but use that as well to rest on. And if the worst comes to the worst, there's always the washing line. No, I wouldn't recommend doing that unless the missus is out. So before we finish then, we're just going to go inside and we're going to take a look at the question of what target sizes at what ranges, what's the biggest challenge, and have a look at how we can vary the target size to simulate shooting bigger targets at further ranges. So let's go inside. Hello, here we are on the digital whiteboard. Again, it's been a while. I want to go through what you can do if you've got limited space to shoot. There's somebody on the range at the weekend who'd seen some of my videos said that I think too much about this stuff. And I guess I do, and this is probably an example of that I've thought too much about it. But I'm a bit of a sort of maths nerd and like to know the ins and outs of everything. So if you've got limited space with which to shoot, what are you going to do? Let's just click this on and move on. Right, so what I did is I used my little spreadsheet that I use for working out my point of impact to work out what the mil dot size is for different kill sizes at different ranges. So you can see here that I've got 35mm target, a 25mm, 20mm, 15 and 10mm target, and what I discovered was that at these ranges in this second column, when you're looking through the scope, the kill will always look the same size. It will always measure 0.9 with just under 1 mil dot on your scope. So that's whether you're shooting a 35mm target at 45 yards, a 25mm at 30 yards, a 20mm at 25 yards, 15mm at 18 yards, or a 10mm at 12 yards. So what that means that is, if you discount the wind and you're shooting at a known range, then to be honest, you're not going to notice a lot of difference between shooting a 10mm target at 12 yards and a 35mm at 45 yards. So you can quite happily practice away. I know there are other things to take into consideration, and perhaps I'm oversimplifying it a bit. But if you've only got 15 yards to practice, you can set a 10mm target out at 12 yards, and you might just as well be shooting a 35mm target at 45 yards, looking through the scope, because it's going to look exactly the same. So I just thought that was interesting to show that you can simulate different target sizes at different ranges without actually having that range available for you to shoot. So let's move on then. What is the most difficult HFT shot? Now this is a bit of a bone of contention at times between some people. What shot is the most difficult in an HFT comp? Now from the rules we know, or from the rules that I shoot anyway, we know that a 15mm target can go out at a maximum range of 25 yards. A 20mm can go out maximum of 30, 25mm maximum of 40, and a 35mm maximum of 45 yards. So which one of those then is the most difficult shot? Now people have different opinions about this. Some will always say that it's the 25mm at 40 yards. I've always thought that I think that 15mm at 25 yards is not particularly easy. So let's have a look then. When you do the maths, surprisingly, these first three all come up as the same size through the scope, through a true mil dot scope. They'll all show up as 0.7 mil dots. So you could argue that they're all equally as easy or equally as hard. The 35mm comes up at 0.9, so that should be a bit easier. I think we all know that, you know, these are going to be harder than that, but I just thought that that was interesting. And one of the things that I did do as well just links back to the earlier table about whether you've got sufficient space or not. If you add the 10mm, a 10mm target at 15 yards, it should be the equivalent. So again, if you've only got 15 yards to shoot and you shoot at a 10mm target, then it should be equally as difficult as the others. You know, I mean, if you've got a view on that, please put it in the comments. But it's interesting. It's interesting to look at. So that's all I've got for this this digital white box session. Anyway, I just thought that you know, that was worth a look at. Well, that's all we've got in this video. I hope you found that interesting and useful. Thanks for sticking around for so long, and don't forget, please like, subscribe and share to support the channel. It doesn't cost you anything, and hopefully I'll see you back on the next one. Bye for now.